Tyler, today's guest is someone who I feel like you are almost the same person, just in a different industry.
Yeah, I looking at what he was doing, there were a lot of similarities, and then speaking to him and his mindset and his outlook definitely was very relatable to me. We have plenty of guests on. I'm like, yeah, I like them. I connected with them, but I did feel that a lot of what he feels, a lot of what he's doing, is something that I could implement and have implemented, and it's just a very similar mindset. So it was a good conversation. I've just been thinking a lot lately about really spending more of my time and effort advocating for the smaller owner operators and not preaching that we need to make these massive changes and ensuring that the smaller operations are profitable, don't have to kill themselves to make a living. And Eric, who is in the design world, architecture, or at least that's where he started, has found a way to monetize what he's doing and create an entire business model. With that being, the architecture field being the impetus for what he's doing, but that I wouldn't say that definitely is not his main source of income now, but it's all based around that. So yeah, really, really neat guy, really neat conversation, and I appreciate all his insight and just his angle and perspective on things is definitely very unique.
Yeah, guys, if you want to check out Eric, or you might already know him, but 30by40.com, and you're going to spell out 30by40.com. He's got a pretty impressive YouTube channel, and an even more impressive website.
Hope you guys like it.
This podcast is brought to you by Andersen Windows. Whether you're replacing, remodeling, or building new, Andersen 100 series windows and patio doors offer many advantages over vinyl. They offer superior strength and performance because they're made from an innovative Fibrex composite material, which is 2 times stronger and more durable than vinyl.
They're also available in a variety of colors with finishes that are made to last and designed to retain their stability and rigidity in all climates. 100 series products feature virtually seamless corners for a cleaner, more contemporary look. Plus, they are environmentally responsible and energy efficient, making them a better choice for your home or next project. Learn more at andersonwindows.com.
Are you in the construction business and looking to scale from, say, $1 million to $10 million? Or what about $10 million to $20 million?
Look no further than Buildertrend, the ultimate construction management platform built to turn efficiency into profitability. This system is for builders serious about their growth, the kind who know how to tackle a project and have some processes built out, but now are committed to getting their whole business working as a well oiled machine.
With Buildertrend, you can now streamline your workflow, collaborate seamlessly with your team, subs, and clients, and take control of your financials like never before.
They're more than just project management. From lead generation to improving profits, Buildertrend is the new way to run your entire business. Visit buildertrend.com/MC demo today to schedule a free demo.
And guys, we're going to talk about this in the podcast today, but we have an event coming up, the Contractor Coalition Summit, which we are hosting in Minneapolis, May 15th through the 19th. Tyler is joining us this time, which I'm stoked about. Um, tickets are limited to 30 max, and I'm watching people sign up on a daily basis. So head over to contractorcoalitionsummit.com. Make sure you snag your ticket. It's going to be a jam-packed few days, and would love to have you there. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me on here. I know it took a while to coordinate this. It sounds like we were all back and forth and
It
meetings and
wasn't.
clients. Yeah.
It's funny. I was like begging the team. I was like, we have to get Eric on. Like I
Oh God.
chatted with him years ago, and I forget you had said like not at this time or something. I was like, well, then I'm just gonna ask at a different time. But I remember being excited when I saw you show up on the schedule, and then I canceled on you. And I was like,
No,
Yeah.
there's no way he's coming on. Like that was it. That was the one and only shot.
you blew it. No,
And
man, I'm not a big time guy anyway, man. It's just a matter of coordinating schedules, and clients always come first. I know Catherine reached out.
mm,
She's like, he's got a client meeting. I was like, yeah, that's definitely priority. So
yeah,
it's no worries.
it was, yeah. I mean, it ended up not paying off, but it was a good meeting. We didn't get the job. That's the only sucky part.
You missed the podcast and you didn't even get the job?
I think I got a future job out of it, but I didn't get that job. No.
Mm.
Ooh, uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah, heard that
real.
before.
Yeah, it's like, hey, on the next one. This one, not so much. I was like, okay, yeah,
It's
cool.
like when customers call you, like, "We have a bunch of stuff we
Oh,
wanna
yeah.
do in the future if it
Yeah,
works out."
as long as you give me a discount.
Cool.
Yeah, love hearing that.
Um, Eric, you're up in Maine, in a pretty rural part of Maine. Is that right?
Yep, Mount Desert Island, which is kind of Acadia National Park. If you've ever been
Yeah,
there or heard of it, it's pretty. We're kind of end of the line here, man. All the good builders don't really make it up here anymore. I
yeah.
hate to say that, but it's been hard. We've had a hard couple of years here. So
Are you on a true island?
yeah, yep, yeah,
So
it's an island.
ferry or plane?
There's a land bridge here, so
Oh,
it's
okay.
yeah, third largest island on the East Coast. So Long Island, Martha's Vineyard, Mount Desert Island
Oh,
is the kind of thing. So, and it's pretty well populated here, especially in the summer. But a lot
mhm.
of the work I do is out on kind of further afield on smaller islands, which have mailboats and
Yeah.
sometimes just barges that you land on the beach, kind of thing. So it's a unique place to practice.
How did you end up there?
My wife took a postdoctoral fellowship at a biomedical research lab that's here, and it's kind of strange that it's here, but it was established in the 20s,
Mm,
and she's been running a genetics research lab up here for 20 years now. So
That's
I
cool.
I followed her here, and honestly, I practiced here because my childhood dream was to always do houses,
Yeah.
residential architecture, and this is the perfect place for it because people are building kind of probably similar to your markets, second, third, fourth homes up here. So it's a good market to practice in.
And where were you relocating from?
Connecticut,
Oh,
so kind
okay.
of central Connecticut area. Yep.
Yeah.
mhm.
And I was
What
doing commercial work down there, like kind of like school education, government projects, institutional work, big 3, 4, 500,000 square foot
Yeah.
projects, just like mind numbing, work. It was pretty
Was
terrible.
was that transition to residential at the same time you moved up there?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, it was.
was
Okay.
how long has that been? Like 20 years or less?
Yeah, we moved up in 2001.
Okay.
So yeah,
Yeah, so over 20 years.
yeah.
So obviously you have an affinity for modern architecture, but at the point where you're moving up there, was there much of a market for that up there?
So I was pretty choosy in terms of
Mhm.
who I wanted to work with because I knew I didn't have a real strong residential portfolio. So what I did was, I targeted firms that were doing sort of the more modern side of work. Ended up working with a group that was doing kind of the most modern stuff up here. And so, yeah, there's a demand for it, but it's limited. And some of like we have a couple of projects on the island right now that are 30, $35 million, and they are sucking up all the labor force, and also they're kind of bringing their architects from New York, Philadelphia,
So
down your
tho
way, Boston area. So
so those aren't your projects, those are other projects that are happening on island.
that's right. Yeah. So it's a funny place. There is a fair number of sort of modernist projects now that are making their way up the coast and in this area. So there is a contingent of modern work, but there's also a lot of the 1880s shingle style. This place was developed by the Rockefellers, and
Yeah.
they brought with them that affinity for a very traditional style of architecture. So there's a lot of that kind of, hey, let's, I'm sure you both are used to doing this kind of work. We want to replicate this sort of neo-traditional style today. And I'm so not into that. And the firm
Yeah.
that I worked for first off, when I first moved up here, they were doing some of that work too. It's
Mhm.
it's kind of, those are kind of bread and butter projects, I think, for every firm. But I decided pretty early on that I didn't really want those projects for
Yeah.
myself. So
It's interesting, like, you look at Nantucket, for example, where it's so regulated, and so few people have been able to pull off something that's kind of out of the box. But I was talking to a builder recently. He goes, the funny part about Nantucket is everything's a small cottage, But when you look at the square footage of the home, it's like 14,000 square feet because they bury the whole house.
Oh, right. That's
The
true. Yeah,
the
yeah.
ent the entire backyard is living space, but it's turfed over, there's a pool, and it's just this little cottage. And in one in one brain, I feel like that's cool, but in the other brain, it's like it's kinda like remodeling a house where, you can market it as, "Hey, look at this beautiful remodel I did," but when you step outside, it's not yours.
Uh-huh.
It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
"This isn't my project, it's something else I doctored up inside." And, that's similar to Nantucket, even Boston, where it's, you think of the brownstones on Beacon Street and Marlborough Street and Comm Ave. It's you walk down those street, there will be there's single families that will be $30 million into that home. Beautiful, beautiful single family brownstone, and you're standing on the sidewalk and you look to the one to the right of it, and from outside it looks no different, but the one to the right of it's run down and it literally has 15 apartments in it. And to
Yeah.
me, it's like, man, like if I was paying $30 million for something, I want everyone to kind of know,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, there's an authenticity question there for sure. Yeah.
And I think that, I have that similar mind of view where it's like I want to be in more control and have something that is more holistic, and not so governed. And I don't think anything's wrong with governing like Nantucket architecture. I think there's actually something really special about that. But there's also something really special about, these other areas that kind of support it in more of an artistic way in these remote
Yeah.
areas where it's like if you're heading up the coast and you're come across this island and there's just this, modern house hanging off a cliff. It's like, man, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I have some trouble with someone deciding that a certain period in time is this style of architecture that we're going to
Mhm,
design for in perpetuity. The European ideal is to really distinguish between old and new. You can't actually make something new that looks like it's old because there are actually laws against that. So when you're renovating things, there has to be a very clear distinction between old and new.
mhm,
And I guess I ascribe to that more than the other way around. And Bar Harbor is one of the local towns here on the island, and it has all of these historic regulations, which I find myself brushing up
mhm,
against all the time, and they're ludicrous. Some of the design standards that are put in place by people who know nothing about design,
mhm.
and that's where I kind of get my back up about those kinds of things. So yeah.
What is it about a more traditional style of home or architecture that you recently just said that that's just not for you? What I would assume being based in New England, whether it be Connecticut or Maine, like you're putting yourself in the hotbed of traditional shingle style homes and you're looking to do just like Nick something that's so much different than that. But what is it about that that led you towards more of a modern architecture or that just isn't for you?
I think it just has to be an expression of you know contemporary times, what we are capable of doing. I mean, to require me to put in double hung windows that have a fake muntin pattern in the glass in a house in the center of Bar Harbor with a certain kind of detail on the roof eave, like why are you requiring me to do that when I don't need, we needed muntins in the 1800s because we couldn't make glass bigger than,
Mhm,
Mhm.
a 6 by 6 square. So I get that. And so for me, it's more about an authentic expression of, contemporary construction technologies. To me, that's just a much more interesting and authentic way to build, in the same way that, a barn may have been built with traditional timber frame, wood that they found in the forest where they were making the barn. Like, to me, there's a reason for it being there. And, I still use white cedar shingles because the whole forest out here is all white cedar. It's like a locally available material. It's affordable. It weathers well. Like that's sensible to me. But, do I have to use it in a certain applied technique that they might have used in the 1880s? Like what I, to me, I don't understand that. So I'd
It
rather come up with a logic for using it that makes sense.
it's interesting to look at it from that perspective too, because a lot of times when people are looking to build a new old home with overhangs and gable details and cornices, you are having to go up above and beyond to ensure that that house is like environmentally conscientious and sustainable. And it's basically you're insulating, and then it's an overframe of everything just to
Mhm.
create those details. And it's throwing money at something that doesn't necessarily have to be that way.
Yeah, it's kind of lipstick, right? I mean,
Mhm.
is there a reason for it being that? Like overhangs make a lot of sense in this
Yeah.
climate. You know, when you get a lot of in a marine climate where there's a lot of rain. But you know, if actually you're right on the edge of the ocean and all you get is sideways, 40-mile-an-hour winds for the entire year, an overhang doesn't make any difference.
Yeah.
It serves no function. So, I don't know. I want there to be, I always want there to be a logic to the design moves. And I think, in the 1880s, there was a logic to that design
Mhm.
style that I don't think applies today. And so I guess it's less pushing back on, um, a style and more just
Yeah.
on someone's preconception of like, well, and my house needs to look like this because everything else in this neighborhood looks like that. Like that's the part I have a problem with.
And I think that's the argument. Like that's the entire argument that hey, this neighborhood has a certain aesthetic and streetscape to it, and we're
Mhm.
looking to maintain that. So what from your perspective, what is the argument to the other side of the coin where it's like we can create a unique home in the space while it still fits the streetscape?
I mean, I think the argument is that there are ways to learn from and use the same design methodologies that make you feel comfortable in that streetscape, like scale, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to come in and put an 8-story building next to a 3-story building when the whole language of the neighborhood is that. But I don't think, we're doing ourselves a disservice if we let our communities sort of stagnate in one particular time period. I mean, New Orleans is a perfect example of this, right? It's kind of like a theme park. There's it's a design style that was of a certain time, iron railings, there's sort of ornate detailing, and that creates a certain effect, but you'll never have any, that city will never be anything but that if you don't
Yeah.
let it evolve naturally. So I think, my argument here is just that cities are dynamic places. And the thing that I love about Boston or New York is that it's always changing, and
Mm.
there are certain rules and regulations, but it's an exciting dynamic place because of the streetscape that is always changing, and there's new things always popping up. And so to think that we got it right at one particular point in time is kind of, it's silly to me.
I
Do you
think it what sorry, Nick, what also silly to me is that oftentimes so there's extreme ends of this, right, where Nantucket, where they're going to uphold a certain standard, but where it's more lax, they aren't executing the traditional details correctly
Mhm.
anyway, that it's like, why does it matter?
Right.
Right? And like scale and proportion, all of that stuff. And it's like, okay, so you have a traditional house, but it's 12,000 square feet and everything else around it is 2,500. Like, cool. So it has like a traditional cornice detail on it and like turned balusters on the front porch with mahogany, but the house just does not fit
It's so true.
whatsoever.
Yeah, it's so true. That's that, you hit it. Yeah.
and I was gonna add to that in the sense that, it's as though I think it's similar to building code where, these codes are in place because they're trying to combat the minimum standard, right? Where there's a lot of people building and they're building subpar products, so they need to create this standard. Where I think about, Beacon Hill is a great example in Boston, where it's super regulated, very, very particular. We did a renovation on a brownstone, and we were required to use wood single pane windows. And I was like, we can't insulate the glass? They're like, absolutely not. Like, but you can put storm windows on it. And I was like, okay, what's the criteria for the storm window? They're like, we don't care. I'm like, it's
Oh,
literally the thing that you're going to see, and you don't care.
yeah,
So,
this is the
but
logic in play.
Yeah, but it would be, and I think what you're getting at is it's not so much that this is wrong or this is or is bad, but it's almost an unfortunate response to the fact that we need to combat that. If we didn't have these regulations in play, you'd have a bunch of bullshit. Like, you just have a bunch of crap product, and people designing and building things that weren't as considerate of, the present time or present use of materials.
but it's also like a question of like who gets to decide. Like,
Yeah.
and
Wow.
oftentimes it's just it's certain committees, and
Yeah, and those committees, man. Woo.
I mean, we've all been in front of them before, and you can't
Mm,
win. And it's like this entrenched attitude that's not often informed by good decision making or design theory or most. It's just lowest common denominator decision making,
mm.
and that's kind of what I push back on. I mean, building codes are fantastic, right, from a life safety standpoint. But I think that's a little bit of a different question. We need
Yeah,
codes for sure. Do we need design review standards so everything looks like Celebration in Florida? I don't know. I'm not sure I do.
yeah, Arizona's like that too. You think about all the commercial in Arizona where it's everything is that muted tan. It's
Right.
every building is all the signage is brown, all the buildings are tan, and it's, basically intended so as you fly through, you don't see it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. We're going through a design review process with a project in Boston, but the neighborhood that we're working in isn't regulated, but they still do a design review,
Oh.
and it's held up, and I'm like, what's going on? So they're like, we have to hop on a Zoom to run through this stuff. I'm like, yeah, no problem. And they were recommendations. So I'm listening, and one of them was, it would be really nice if you replaced all the railings on the front of the house with glass instead of iron. I'm like, sure. They're like, would that be cost prohibitive? I'm like, absolutely. Like, what? So is that a requirement? No, we just think that that would be better looking than iron. I'm like, not going to happen. So they were like they said fine. And then on the back of the house, they're like, it would be really nice if those bedrooms had larger windows. I think you should punch bigger openings in the facade. And I was like, and they said, is that cost prohibitive? I'm like, yes. And they're like, will you do it? I'm like, no, not to mention the only reason that those windows are there and being replaced as is because by code, they're not allowed because they're too close to the setback. So I'm not even allowed to make them bigger by code. You're making this recommendation because you think someone laying in bed is gonna appreciate a bigger window. I was
Wow.
like, and it's just all of these, and I was like, "So, and is any of this required?" And they're like, "No, these are all recommendations." I'm like, I will take the recommendations, and I will consider them, and I will resubmit based on my feelings."
It's
Oh,
also you're essentially telling people how they have to spend their money on their own
Yeah.
home, and if that were the case for these people sitting on the committees, how would they feel?
exactly.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
Um, I was listening to a podcast with you, Eric. It might have been a few years old at this point, but you were transitioning from more client based work to more of the media side of things. I think at that point it was like 25-75%.
Hmm.
You were doing primarily um, either media or passive income type stuff. What does that split look like now?
Today it's more like 90-10. Yeah.
That's cool.
90
Yeah.
media?
Yeah.
And passive.
Wow.
And 10% active client work, and I'm being very choosy about projects that I take moving forward, which is, I mean, this is a non-traditional practice.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I know you guys speak with a lot of other architects who have traditional practice and maybe bigger businesses, but I never really set out to make a big business for myself.
Mhm.
And maybe you can relate to this, Tyler, because I think you have a smaller business like
Yep.
mine, right? I I really wanted a way to. I mean, when I started this business, I was just like the singular architect. That's how I saw myself.
Mhm.
And out of necessity, I started my YouTube channel amongst a whole bunch of other experiments that I was running, plan sets, writing. I was blogging for House.
And that was just for alternative means of income?
Yeah, because I just wanted a diversified stream of revenue. I mean, when
Yep.
I first started, I was just doing the pure services model that pretty
Mhm.
much every architect does. And I just found my stable of projects that I could get at the time were, I had like 5 projects running simultaneously. And as a sole practitioner, I just found that life was like miserable. I had,
Yeah.
5 different clients that I'm dealing with and design review boards and contractors and all the design work that goes into that and construction and schedules. And I just decided at a certain point that like that was not the kind of business that I wanted to run. And so I needed to look for a different way to do that. I needed to work on fewer projects. And in order to work on fewer projects, it meant they needed to have bigger budgets, longer time scales. And, those naturally don't come along as often, especially here. There's like a season when we get our projects for the year. And I needed something to bridge the income gap between when I had those projects, when those projects would come along. And so I just started doing all of these passive income earning experiments. And YouTube was one of them because I thought this is a good way to market my business. There's not a lot of other architects making videos at the time. And I thought it'd be a good way to get my name out there. And also I thought, oh, ad revenue is going to be insane,
Yeah.
which we
And
all,
how long ago was that?
I started right in 2013. So
Okay.
yeah, it was quite a long time ago. And all I did was just start. I was writing for house.com at the time, and
Yeah.
just as a way to get my kind of business out there. And I turned the articles I was writing into these like really terrible talking head videos. Um, and I just, I started monetizing them. And then at a certain point, I realized like I started kind of loving filmmaking and photography, and I started getting more serious about maybe teaching people about what I was doing. I would take whatever project I was working on. I just kind of put a camera over my desk
Mm,
as I was working on that project and just would sketch along with it. And people started liking those. And then I started getting into video production and more into photography, and just every step of the way, every experiment that I was running in the business, I would just kind of document it. So I would blog about it. I would put it on YouTube, put it on Instagram, whatever I could, LinkedIn. And
mm,
the things that people reacted to, I just started doing more of. And so I kind of found this, I've kind of made this studio into this workshop for like making different things.
Yeah.
And instead of just being like an architect, I could be all these other things which interested me.
mm.
I think it's so funny when we choose our careers. I don't know when you guys knew you wanted to do what you're doing today, but
Still, I'm not sure I want to.
yeah, well, that's the thing, right? Like when you're 16 and 17, you're kind of testing out ideas. And, I thought being an architect just meant like doing technical drawings and building models, like playing with cardboard and stuff like that. I was so naive. I had no idea that I would even be interacting with builders. And like most of the job is getting the thing designed, but like getting it built. Like
Yeah.
that's the hard part of the job, and not that I don't love that, but that was a dimension of practice that I just like, I had no idea. I thought, hey, I'm just going to get to do drawings all day. And so, when you choose this career at 16 or 17, it's like you haven't really fully vetted all the other interests that you have in life. And it turns out like I really love filmmaking. I really love
Yeah.
photography. I love writing, like all these other things. And so I guess I kind of came to this space where I made this into the business that I really wanted it to be. I kind of designed something for myself rather than just accepting the kind of, the past businesses that I had been an employee in, and just, working with clients one-on-one. And so I didn't architect this thing like all from the beginning. It just kind of organically came to be what it is today, which is
Well,
like a whole different bunch of different things.
yeah, and I mean, you would have to enjoy all of those aspects of what you're doing now because especially at the transition point, it's a lot of work. Like documenting it, like
Yeah,
it slows things down immensely.
for sure.
And it's a lot of work. So it has to be something that you find interesting, or else it's just like it'd just be easier to do the architecture thing. And looking at it from the outside, I think that there's a really interesting and like dynamic juxtaposition between what you started doing and what you're doing now. Because when you think of architecture as a profession, you're really, unless you build up this name for yourself where people are like, I want your style, like you're just serving the customer.
Yeah, for
Like that's
sure.
all you're doing. It's the customer's program, it's their money, it's their budget, it's what they want, their inspiration. And you're now creating a career in architecture through architecture that's completely serving you.
Yeah. And I mean, it's funny because, I mean, I think I always, gosh, I just lost my train of thought. You're going to have to excuse me here.
It's fine. I mean, so essentially what I was saying is that like the traditional architecture approach is 100% serving the customer. Again,
Mm,
unless you're building this reputation where they're coming and they're saying, "Hey, I want Eric's style of house." But like not a lot of architects get there. So you've created this entire business around architecture, but it's to serve yourself. It's not necessarily to be serving these customers. And it's something that I found myself doing with my business
Uh-huh.
a little bit more, right? Where it's less client driven and more about what makes me happy, and being able to fulfill interests professionally with things that I find interesting that aren't necessarily indicative to what you generally see getting into remodeling or construction.
Yeah, I think it's I think when I realized that I was going to be doing houses and I wanted a business of one, that I didn't want to build a big team and have all of these houses out and like doing 6 or 8 houses a year. I don't know how many houses you're doing a year, Nick, but it seems like a lot. Um, maybe it's more than that. But when I
It's
realized
less.
it's less,
Yeah, it's
okay.
less.
But I mean, I realized that doing houses, you don't get to do that many houses in your entire career, and so I realized at a certain point that the number of people that are going to be impacted by my work, my architecture is just it's so few. I can count them on
Mm,
2 hands probably, and so I was okay with the idea that I could trade this kind of big portfolio of work for one that had maybe a bigger impact in the world, and like building a YouTube channel and sharing like what I consider to be best practices with other people who maybe are going to build a bigger business or maybe are going to hire employees and do different things, or maybe show other architects that, you can have collaborative relationships with builders. It doesn't have to be adversarial. To me, trading that portfolio of work for one of impact and legacy that became kind of the driving force for the business. And that's kind of the guiding light now. um, and just showing like we can have conversations like this, and architects can learn from builders. I mean, I consider the builder to be a part of the design process, like that they're
mhm.
brought in at the very beginning of the design process. And I don't know if that's true in your guys' experience, but
I was
it's
gonna
kind
say
of
that.
unusual here.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say that's the ideal approach, and I think everyone agrees. Every architect we talk about pre-construction. They're like, "That makes so much sense." It's like, why is that? Then why aren't we doing it? It's like,
Yeah.
well, the
So
client really wants 5 prices, and it's like, but for what?
yeah, that's
And
so
it's like, well,
interesting. Are you still is it all bid work down like
no,
outside Maine?
I Boston is pretty competitive. When we have kind of continued to tier up each year into different
Mhm.
markets and different price points and kind of different, uh, l- you know, intensity, I guess we'll call it. And so we are being presented opportunities to bid work, and and I think I've said this before, but our intent is not to bid. We want to be brought in and be brought in early, and we develop the team together, and like there's this common goal. Um, but there's like this golden carrot that's dangled. It's like, this one's a really cool project.
Of
do you want
course.
to potentially bid it? And we've done that more than I would like to say. And every time I say this out loud, like I'm like, why do we do it? But I've never gotten the job. And the what we when I canceled on you, I was bidding a job.
Yeah.
And that was a really awesome job, like, very high dollar, very, very high level of execution. And we nailed the interview. We nailed the proposal. We had, gold stars across the board. And I said, what was the deciding factor not to go with us? And it was, it was two very minor things. And it had to do with the size of our company and
Mm.
the depth of our portfolio.
Uh-huh.
Two things I can't control.
Right. Yeah,
And
so
they were
why were
like,
you even
"Yeah,
considered?
yeah." And I tend to try to shed a good light on it where it's like, "No, you know what? Listen, it's a great opportunity to learn. Like,
You
we
learned something,
were
yeah.
under the gun. We bid this amazing job." And I said to him, like, At least let me learn from this. Where were we on pricing? Give me like, what was the range?" And they were like, "You were the highest." I'm like, "By how much?" And it was like $100,000, and we're talking like a $9+ million job. I'm
Okay.
like, "Great.
Yep.
So we're where we want it to be." And they were like, "But you had the most detailed proposal." I'm like, "So we were the most accurate," is what like, we probably
Exactly.
were the most accurate.
So we did everything right
Yeah,
and you don't want to
literally
hire us.
everything, like, had this thing nailed. Um, They're
Oh,
like, "You're"
yeah.
they were like, "By the way, your proposal lights out the best looking proposal, like, most in depth, most engaging, because 'cause we've spent, like, 14 months building this proposal document that we sent." And I'm like, "You're really, like, pumping me up, but, it's all for nothing."
See,
And
that's
but
I was
that
just gonna say that's an opportunity for you not only to learn from it, but also to, like, how do you take those resources that you're already creating and, like, now you can productize that stuff? I mean, that's what I've done with my business. Like,
yeah,
Mhm.
I'm putting the work in. I might as well turn these into assets that other people can use. Because, like, if you had a spec, I'd buy it. I mean,
dude,
no
Eric,
in no
we talked years ago, and I'm just gonna give you kudos where it's due. Your videos are so therapeutic, and I've watched so many of them, and to the point where I can't flip my camera down, but I have the leather desk mat that you had in one of your videos, because I watched that. Tyler, he did this video of, like, his office tour, and he linked
Yeah.
everything from Amazon, and I literally bought the entire catalog. Like, I'm
the
sitting in the
oh, thank you.
chair. I'm sitting in the same chair. I know you get the affiliate link, and I'm sitting in the same chair with the rollerblade wheels. Like, I was like, "This is amazing." But to your point, um, people kept asking me, like, I had posted something about our handbook, and they're like, "Dude, I'll
Yeah,
buy the handbook from
I'll
you."
buy it.
And so fast forward, I took a page out of your book, and I ended up putting the handbook on my nickschiffer.com site.
Awesome.
And I'll get an email a day. It's like new download, new download, I'm like, this is crazy. But
So is
I'm
it
realizing
free? Is
no,
it free now?
it's it so it cost me like 5 grand to have the lawyer and branding team put everything together,
Uh-huh.
and I have it up for like 250 bucks.
Nice. That's
and
awesome.
and yeah, and then I have like this other labor calculator where I looked at it as anyone can put this stuff together. I'm just saving you the hour, 2 or 4 hours putting it together, so your time's probably worth more than 50 bucks an hour if you're in
Exactly.
that position.
But it's
So
also it's
hey,
more than that when you guys and you're doing this now, but you're building this brand, right?
mm,
And I know you're into brand building. It's not just saving them time. They're buying like your system for doing things. And like
mhm,
when I see your videos and I look, at the attention to detail and I hear you talk about the process, I want that. Like that's
yeah,
aspirational for me. And especially, I mean, I don't know what kind of other content is out there for you guys builder wise. Like I see some of Matt Reisinger's stuff, and to me, that's a little more technical and like a little less aspirational. Um, but if you are plugging into this education component for people who are coming up behind you, the people who are
yeah,
2 or 3 steps behind you and who want businesses that look like yours,
mhm,
like that's a huge opportunity. And to me, it's a way of divorcing, the time that you're working and the assets that you're creating from what you're able to earn. And you think about, you can't scale your time.
yeah,
But
Yeah.
all these things you're making for these projects and all the work you're putting in and estimates, and I don't know what the other kind of things are that you guys create as part of your work, but to me it's exciting to think about those being assets that can help support you through maybe a lean time, or maybe you don't have to bid that project. Maybe you're going to work on this suite of products or coaching, like you guys would be perfect for group coaching. I mean, you're talking to all these different people, you have all this project experience. Like why not put that to good use and like sit a group of 40 guys in a room and say, here's best practices, man.
yeah,
Charge $500 a head. And like, that's an amazing, not only teaching tool, but it elevates your brand and it brings in extra revenue.
Yeah, I actually just well, I didn't record it yet, but I was just writing a podcast about that and realizing that when you put these things into place and you actually create some sort of alternative means of income and you free yourself up enough to actually gauge what your business did and how it's doing and what was successful, like, and I'm thinking of what you do. And one of the biggest hangups for me was, how am I going to give business advice when I'm this small owner operator and I don't like am I faking it, right? Like how and then I realized that there's a lot of people out there who want to do exactly what I'm doing and
mhm,
want to
Exactly.
be profitable being small, and like that's the bulk of our industry. So I spent all these years trying to figure out how can we change the industry to make, like, be able to create an environment where people can sustain having larger companies. And I'm like, part of getting there is just making people profitable as small companies.
Yes.
And like my experience would be fake if I went and told people how to scale a business from 10 to 20 because I don't have that experience. But I do know how to make money being small. And these alternate sources of income have given me enough free time that I can like collect my thoughts and gauge this and actually understand what worked and what didn't. And when I was just having my belt on, I didn't have enough free headspace to really like it was just go go go. You're keeping your
Totally.
head above water. And I felt that I would be a fraud like offering consulting calls because like who am I? And then I realized like it's the same thing that you're doing. You probably can give best practice advice when you're pulled back from it than
Mhm.
when you're knee deep in the shit because it's like at that point you're just trying to survive.
Totally.
But
Yeah. I
And
mean,
when
it's amazing. And I mean, even when you think about just all the contemporary business practices, best practices that you can put around those things, like email marketing. And I mean, I don't know what you guys are using in that respect, but like that's been a huge change. Like I've stepped back from YouTube a little bit to focus on email marketing for the past nine
mhm,
months, and I 10x'd my revenue. Like I 10x'd it. Like it's been crazy. And like to your point, Tyler, just when you know the numbers and you look at your P&L and you know what a new lead in your business, like what that actually means, that's huge. That there's so much power in that. And it's a basic skill and understanding that people in our industry just aren't taught. We're still practicing like we're in the 1980s. I mean, we're still doing
mm.
the same old marketing, lame ass marketing shit that we were doing back
yeah,
then, right?
What I
and
think
I mean, go ahead, Nick.
Well, I want to go back to a point you said, Eric, is the fact that you were what and related to Tyler talking about these consulting calls and feeling kind of this imposter syndrome. But your point of it's not about being an advocate and being like, hey, I've done this, now let me teach. It's hey, the guy that's like right behind me, where it's like, hey,
Yeah,
don't step in that shit. Like walk around that
exactly.
because I just did that. And I think that, I've worked with business coaches and mentors and have been very fortunate to have a podcast like this where we've talked to hundreds of people around the country and frankly around the world in some cases. And it's it, that information is the product.
Yeah,
And
totally.
for me, it's like if I were to start over 10 years ago, I, I remember I was reaching out to anyone I could, like, can you just teach me how to do this? And it's like, no. Or it's
Yeah,
like, I just, how do I do an estimate? It's like, you should know that. It's like, when was I supposed to learn it?
Mhm.
And for like, I think that, Tyler and I have both now understood that and seen this as an opportunity where it's like, okay, we don't need to know everything, but there's something I know that someone else doesn't. So let me at least teach them that. And I think that when you think about mentors and coaches and people that do like professional business coaching, like oftentimes it's someone that's done it
yes, yeah,
and has quote unquote made it. And the issue I have with that is they've kind of got to the top of the mountain and they've caught in their breath. Where it's like I want the guy that's like still out of breath but can just guide me on this really difficult section of the mountain because the guy that's at the top is has already forgotten about the fact that midway up there's whatever. I'm not a mountain climber, so I don't know any terms, but the point is like that guy that's directly in front of you is the most valuable person because they're
totally. Yeah.
helping kind of guide you through.
It's that concept of like just in time learning, like
Mhm,
not to fill your head with the task that's like 4 or 5 steps ahead, but it's like the
yeah,
next one. You're researching. I'm really into email marketing right now, so I'm following all these email marketing podcasts and like AI
mhm,
stuff and like all this information, and it's right here, and I'm putting it to use. And I think you guys are in a unique position to have to be practicing, and also and I see myself like this, like the information is pretty valuable when you are experiencing it and you're sharing that in real time. It's like
mhm,
Mhm.
practicing in public. It's like when you take me on a job site and you show me like the stair riser, like this is how we attach the stair riser. It's like, okay, that's an awesome detail. I need to I need to learn from that. And it's like that level of information um is so valuable. And if you we kind of take it for granted in some ways, but
Mhm.
just even like basic invoicing, it's like, how do you set your billable rate, so
Yeah.
that so that you're profitable? So like I made this like a little tool because I was figuring it out for myself. I'm like, I really got to dial this in better because I was like losing money on this project. I'm like, what the hell am I doing wrong here? And
Yeah.
so I did a bunch of research and then I created this like little downloadable. So someone wants to learn how to do this just like I did, go to this landing page, pick up this little
Mhm.
downloadable, and then the upsell in that is like the little mini course teaching you how to set up your billing rate. And like that's a real need. And
Yeah.
it's valuable to someone else. And then that value is sort of translated to me, each and every day. And I think that's an opportunity that, God, I find that so exciting. And I think about just designing the business and what it looks like in another 5 years, like all the other little assets that I can create that are going to help people behind me. And they're going to do the same, hopefully, for people behind me. So,
It's all the perspective that I also gained by putting yourself out there and publicly conveying your experience. It We have businesses and we will implement a change in our business and not do any legwork to see if it's the right move. But then it's like, all right, I'm going to put this out on the internet. I sure as hell better do my best effort to
that's
make sure
right.
that this is right. And it's just like posting pictures of your work, right? Like
Mhm.
a lot of me doing the work that I do is because it's like, I don't want to get torn a new
Yeah.
one putting this out. Like I want to make sure these proportions are right, these details are right, the machining, the tooling, what I'm doing is correct. And there's something to be said for people who are putting a a combination of their experience plus the knowledge that they're researching out there for everyone to benefit from. Like, I know if I write a blog post or a podcast and I'm speaking to something business related, I understand how it works for my business, but I'm not going to put anything out there that is like, well, yeah, you can't actually do that legally. Like, I want to make sure. And I'm like, oh, I've been doing that for 5 years. And luckily it is the right way to do things. But like, I'm going to definitely double check myself. So I think that there's a lot of validity in people who are putting themselves out there with their business experience
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to teach something, you have
on
to
the
know it.
internet for sure.
You have to know it inside and out. And I'm sure we've all made content where people have corrected us right
I
quick.
Yeah, I
I've
mean,
experienced that so many times. And it's interesting because, I mean, YouTube in itself and is just, it's you. And
mhm.
you're naturally going to have flaws. And I have
Mhm.
to say the videos where I've been most vulnerable and made mistakes and owned up to those mistakes have been like, you know how you can see at the bottom of the YouTube video, the most watched sections? It's
Mhm.
always those sections where I screw something up that
Yeah.
it's like the most watched because it's relatable. We all screw up, So to completely sanitize it is like that's another extreme too. I mean, obviously if you're teaching something that has a business implication, you want it to be as correct as possible. But the flip side to that is like, hey, we screwed up these windows or we screwed up this shower detail, and here's, like sharing that kind
Yeah.
of information is super valuable too. And I think it's what brings people back. And it's why you have an audience, because you do share those mistakes and missteps. Like that's part of it too.
Yeah, the relatability is huge, and we've shared plenty of mistakes, and
Yeah.
some that we shared that we didn't know was a mistake, and based on comments, it became this like monster of a video where I'm referencing a video we did with a Rockwell comfort board installation on top of a Tremco spray waterproofing. And someone was like, "You can't do that with GC250," and it went down this rabbit hole, and to the point where
You're like,
like Rockwell and Tremco both called me. They said, take the video down. You got to re-excavate the foundation, rip all that off, and do it all over again.
oh God, I missed that
And
one. Oh my God.
well, yeah, thankfully because we took it down. And so, and the video was like, for what it's worth, it was cruising. Like it was doing so well,
Of course. Yeah.
and $500 in ad revenue, I'm sure. But the um the reality of that situation is we worked through it, came to a solution that made sense, and we filmed another video. And I said, hey, I screwed up. Sent the video last week. You guys probably saw it. Here's what we did. Here's why it's wrong. Here's how we corrected it. We're moving on.
Yeah. Love it. Yeah.
And same, it's like people are like, I can't believe you would admit to that. And it just that's a big reason why we share, is
Yeah.
for that feedback. And and when it's constructive, like there's plenty of crap that gets responded, and and they really reach for certain things. But it's like, at the end of the day, I'm looking at it, I'm like, all right, we're fact checking ourselves.
For
you know
sure. Yeah.
that I want to go back to something you said, that you were talking about kind of the fundamentals or the basics. And I think that from an education standpoint, oftentimes people are trying to teach the complicated stuff, and they're skipping over the fundamentals, and where it's like, what about basic invoicing? What about man hours? How do I know what my labor burden is? And because you're like, well, you should know that. It's like, but that's a thing. It's like, but how? When was I
Yeah.
supposed to learn that?
Right.
And I was listening to a podcast called The Founders, and in this particular one, shout out Mark Williams, because he turned me onto it. But it was about Kobe and Michael Jordan, and in Tyler and I were together, and we were talking about kids sports. And I'm not a big sports guy, never was, never really into it. But in this
Yeah.
podcast, they were talking about the issue with kids sports these days is that they're trying to teach them everything, and
Hmm.
and getting super complicated, and just dabbling them into all these little things where, you know, Kobe and Michael were talking like, no, when I was a kid, it was shoot the basket in the hoop, the ball in the basket 1,000 times, over and
Right.
over and over and over and over, until you couldn't mess it up. And it's like,
Yeah.
I watch my kids, they were playing hockey the other day. They're young, so it's kind of just exposure at this point. But they were doing these drills where they would spend 4 minutes doing a skill, and then the bell would ring and they'd go to the next skill. And I'm like, he he hasn't even made it around the ring yet. He hasn't even figured out how to do that.
Yeah.
And it's like that, that repetition, and understanding the fundamentals. And I think that you're doing a great job from the architecture standpoint, and I hope that our content's doing, a good, you know a good service from the building perspective. But at least starting at something that is relatable, and that is the fundamentals, and that is the opportunity where it's like, hey, you know nothing, and you want to know something. Here's where you start.
And you have, with an audience, you have the chance to move the whole industry. I mean, I'm a little nobody up on an island off the coast of Maine, and I have a million people on my YouTube channel, and like that's a big megaphone. And so,
Mm,
not only is it a responsibility, but it's also a chance to like shift the dialogue and make a change. And I love to see people like you guys building an audience, because there's a I mean, that's a business asset. Speaking of business assets, I mean, audience is a huge business asset, and you can
mhm.
use it to great effect, to make change bigger than yourself. And I love the idea that I can affect people across the world who may not have access to the same resources that we have here in the US, and give them best practices that maybe are going to trickle down there in 10 or 15 years. Like they can get it now for free. And so, yeah, it raises all kinds of questions, and it's interesting to me, because I think when I first started this YouTube channel in 2013, people kind of laughed at it, and it's like a waste of time. And you know, social media, it's like, do you really need that? And it's turned
Mm.
into a separate business, and something
Yeah.
which is
90% of
just,
your income.
yeah. And I mean, obviously you have to be smart, and I'm not making ad revenue that's covering 90% of my income, but you have to build systems around that to
Yeah.
pull people into your email list, and control an audience. Basically, like the YouTube audience and your podcast audience is not really an audience you control. So
Mhm.
you have to find a way to be smart about that. And I've tried to help people, design professionals, understand that too, because there's all kinds of algorithms that are working against us. We face headwinds everywhere, and I think we have to be smart business owners by building an email list audience as well. So yeah, anyway,
So
You can you,
in
you can tell you've been doing the email marketing, because I'm in
it's
the same
huge.
space right now, where it's like
Are
we
you?
we we do all the social media. And recently I was like, I need an email list. And I set it up, Mailchimp, did 2 test runs, and no lie, ended up with someone reached out, was like, hey, I've been wanting to reach out for a few months. I actually want to build a house. I was like, what?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I have to introduce you to people I'm working with, man. You would be perfect for them. But
yeah,
it's a
please.
huge missed opportunity.
Well,
I think for a
I
lot of
think
people.
yeah, I think, and Tyler, sorry I cut you off, but like I think that
Sure.
generally speaking, we find what works and we ride that wave. And for our industry, Instagram has been this like never-ending wave.
Uh-huh.
And it's just been this social media channel that has adapted to who we are and what we're doing, and so many people have built massive audiences on there and have chosen all these different paths in terms of like who they are as a quote unquote character in this world, right? And
Right.
and YouTube is incredibly powerful, being the search engine it is. But Cliff Notes is like, no, you're not making $1 million a year in ad revenue. And if you are, then you're spending 4 million a year creating video.
Right.
Or you're showing your boobs.
Which wouldn't work for
To
me.
be
Yeah.
to
or
be
that.
honest. I mean, that was my question. I mean, how are you leveraging your audience in a non-traditional sense? Because I think when a lot of us think, "Oh, okay, you're an influencer or you make money through social media," the perception of what that is, I don't feel is necessarily accurate. For me, it's given me an opportunity to build relationships with people and company that have been financially lucrative for
Okay.
me.
Yep.
Um,
So like
but it's
sponsorships, do you mean?
yeah, and then just like working with partners where it's either, hey, we'll create content or we'll teach how people how to use your product, even just from like the podcast perspective where it's like does the podcast make you money? And yes, it makes a certain amount of money, but I think that there's a lot of value within the brand, and I think that it strengthens our other brands to the tune where it's like maybe it's not the most lucrative. The way that we spend our time on the podcast may not be the most lucrative way to spend our time, but it strengthens other brands and creates other opportunities for our main brands to make money. And without it, I don't know if it would be the same thing. So yeah, there's the traditional sponsorships and everything else, but I think that there's a lot of relationships that are established through what we're doing, which is really at the end of the day, when you know somebody from a company or with an organization and you have that personal rapport with them, that's when you can start developing business relationships with them that'll actually make money. So what are you doing to leverage your audience to be able to make money? Because again, and I made the off color joke where it's like you're not showing your boobs, but realistically, like that's how people think that you're making money on the internet, right? Like you have nice looking feet and you're at home modeling your feet for some OnlyFans. But um
Time out, Tyler.
Yeah, it's okay. It's an interesting question. It's I mean, I think you're absolutely right. The know, like, and trust factor of having like, a YouTube audience, for example, where they're seeing me practice in public and seeing how I design and seeing how I work with clients and treat clients and seeing a process that is maybe different than the adversarial one that they probably thought it might be, or I try and model a very accessible collaborative process. And so from a services standpoint, it completely changed the meetings that I would have with new inquiries coming into the office. Like it was no longer like, show me your portfolio and like, let's have this little, dance back and forth. What's your
people
fee?
don't understand how valuable that is.
Yeah. It's not only is it a massive time saver, but it's just, you can pick and choose the projects
Yeah.
that come to
You don't
you.
have to sell to every single person who knocks on your door.
There's like no selling. It's just like, I
Exactly.
want to work with you. And so that in itself I mean, just having that running in the background on YouTube, that just content that stays there for years is hugely valuable. But from a monetization standpoint, you can obviously work with, sponsors. And I've never done that because to me, that always just felt like a job. That felt like someone coming to me and saying, you have a big audience. we have this project, this product, whether it's AutoCAD or whatever product it is. And we want you to do X, Y, and Z. And that's not why I started this business. I didn't start this to work for somebody else. I started to self-direct and make the kind of content that I want to make. And I feel like there's and that's not disparage you guys, because I know you do some sponsors and things like that. But for me, it was, I thought the bigger play was to create my own assets. And if I was ever going to advertise on my channel, that I would advertise for my own personal products. And so all I did was, if I was making a plan set for a client, and it could apply to more than one site, I turned that into a product and I sold it. And I would sell it to people who wanted to build a house, and I would sell, the CAD files to other architects, other design professionals, people who wanted to, have my kind of drawing style. And so over the years, I've just done that time after time after time after time. And I have a whole set of digital products essentially that I created once, and people can buy them. And
So let me
because I
ask you.
take my audience on YouTube and put them on my email list, then they can go through and learn about all the, I kind of meet them wherever they're at. If you're a
Mhm.
homeowner and you need a plan set, but you don't have, $150,000 to hire me to do a custom one for you, here's one for $5,000. And if you're a
So
design professional and you need something, you get the idea, I think.
no, I do, and I guess the one question that's come up in a conversation like this is, I pay you 150 grand, you design my custom house,
Yep.
and then you turn around and, you know, I don't know who technically by your contract owns the rights to those plans,
I
but
do.
then you go sell okay, you sell the plans for 5 grand and Tyler builds the same exact house. It's like, well, what, how are you, I guess, how are you justifying that? Where it's, I paid you all this money to work with me to build this custom one-off house, and now everyone can do it.
Yeah, if you really want a custom one-off house, then it's a different negotiation. Everything in the contract is negotiable. So
Yeah.
if you want me to never sell this plan set, that's a conversation we have, and it's just a
S
licensing fee. That's all. But I own the copyrights to anything, and this isn't common knowledge, I think, throughout the building trades. But the
Mhm.
architect is the copyright owner, the sole copyright owner of that design. I can resell that design as many times as I like. Now, it it is a conversation. Obviously, if I'm designing a $5 million house for somebody, this,
Mhm.
the market for that is usually one, so I'm
Right.
not
No
taking
one's gonna
$5
buy a
million.
5,000 yeah, $5,000 plan to go build a $5 million house. You're
Right.
starting
So
over, yeah.
yeah, so it's like, it's kind of the Venn diagram that doesn't, those two circles don't really ever cross.
Mhm.
So the person who's going to hire you to do a custom build out on an island on a granite cliff overlooking the ocean, like, you're not going to plunk that down in Medford, Massachusetts. You probably, I mean, it's a one-off
Out of
thing.
out of all towns, you pick Medford?
I don't know. Is that where you live?
I live
No,
in
it's a
Medford, New Jersey.
that
Okay,
is
sorry.
no, it's just a funny town to relate to a granite
My
cliff
wife's from
overlooking
Mass.
the
Yeah.
ocean. Ah,
Anyway, um,
so have you ever had that, like, has anyone ever questioned it?
question
Like,
me
has
selling
it
plan
yeah, that
sets?
selling their plans.
No.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think,
I think it's a huge, I think I hear from other architects more than anyone else. It's like, you can't do that. It's like, well, who says? I do it
yeah,
all the time. I mean,
right.
I just think it's interesting that people won't question a business model that's not working for them. It's like, well, I do all
Right,
this work and I'm being underpaid. And it's like, okay, well, here's 6 things you can do to change that. And they're like, well, that won't
right,
work. That won't work. Yeah, you can never do that. You're going to get pushback. You can't print in red ink. It's like, all of
right.
these things are just open for testing and experimentation. And I've just been willing to experiment with more of them. Um, some people I think would have a problem with selling plan sets, and that's totally fine, because
Mhm.
you don't need to sell the plan set. You can sell the specs. You can, there's all kinds of value adds and resources that we create, and it could just be a consultation. It could be,
Right.
group coaching. Like, here's a group of people who are really interested in home design, but they don't have the resources to hire an architect. So it's a group coaching session that we do for 6 weeks, and we're going to design
Yeah,
your home together, and I think there's all kinds of opportunities to kind of scale your time, rather than it being a one for one trade. And It just depends on the kind of business that you want. This is what's worked for me, but I
Mhm.
don't pretend that it's the right thing for everyone else. In the same way that you chose to scale your business and have a whole bunch of employees, like that's satisfying to you because it allows you to do more and build more, and that's super exciting. But it wouldn't be the kind of business I would want.
Mhm.
So the avenue that you are headed down now, where it's less client driven work, you're making most of your income through these other avenues. Is it, and I believe I know the answer to this, but is it because this is just an easier way for me to make money? I don't have 5 of the same projects going on where I'm dealing with 5 different customers, contractors, everything else. I have all these balls in the air and it's just not the most fulfilling work? Or is this because you truly enjoy the path that you're going down now?
Yeah, I think I just designed the ideal thing for me, which is I still like doing architecture. I still like working with people one on one to design their homes. Like that's still something I find very interesting. But the way I was doing it before wasn't working. And so
Yeah.
in order to also support that kind of a business, where if you have one or two projects going and someone has a health issue and there's a project delay, like has happened to me recently, if you don't have other things to sub in, that's that's a deal breaker, right? I mean, that's a big problem. So it kind of breaks the model.
I
Um,
also I also think it a lot of times can be more enjoyable when you're not up to your eyeballs in the work, where it's like, yeah, I have one or two things going on and it's enough to scratch the itch and I get like the fulfillment that I need with the architecture, but I don't have to be like buried in it.
yes,
Mhm.
yeah, totally. And also it gives me the chance to make room, like you said before, the kind of creative white space that I can make like films if I want to. I can take
Yeah.
photos. I can do graphic design. Like I've done some product design. Like I have a line of sketchbooks that I've been designing. I have like home accessories that I'm working on, and like that's fun to me because it's still design. It's all about branding, and it's an offshoot. It's a satellite to this business, but it complements it, and it allows me to kind of grow as a business owner in a different way. Cost of goods sold is different for me than just selling my services or a product, a digital
T
product. It's a different set of skills, and it's like super cool to me.
And I think it's really important, like to give people insight and provide them with some sort of vantage point as to how you make a living being an owner operator or one person. That was like primarily what my blog post this past week was about, where it's like a lot of people don't want a big company. A lot of people don't want the headache, they don't want the risk, the liability, but it's almost impossible if you play by the same rules as everyone else to make a decent living, and there's a lot of risk, right? If you get hurt, what's
Totally.
going to happen? So I think giving people some sort of insight and perspective as to how you can make a living being a single owner operator type business is really important, especially in our industry, because as much as we don't want to admit it, the bulk of our industry is one, two, three-man companies,
Hmm.
and they don't know how to make money, and they're off on their own because they couldn't make money working for somebody. And if we can give somebody some sort of perspective as to what works, regardless of what market you're in, I think that could actually substantially change the construction industry, the design end of things, the way that we look at the entire residential building industry.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting exercise to think about the ideal kind of day that you would have, the kind of, how would you design this business if it truly supported the kind of life that you want to live? And like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not pretending I got here in 2 years. Like
Mhm.
in my second year in business, I was pulling my hair out because I was in the position you just described. Like I couldn't step away and take a vacation. Like
Yeah.
I wasn't sleeping at night. It was like really unhealthy. I built myself, I was the worst boss and the worst employee at the same time. And it was like, I knew something had to change. And I do agree that a lot of us kind of find ourselves in this position, yet still want to have the autonomy to practice on their own and do the cool shit with cool people, right? I mean, that's an aspirational goal for a lot of us, and I think it requires stepping back and taking a real hard look at what you want that day to day to look like. And for me, I was just willing to kind of relentlessly execute on all these different ideas until I found a combination of things that worked for me. And I don't know that everyone necessarily has that freedom, but the act of experimenting and practicing in public has I think been instrumental in doing that. So like
I
anyone who can put put themselves out there on YouTube or
Yeah.
publicly, like that's a huge first step to make. I think
Yeah.
that's a great starting point. I don't know if you guys agree or not.
I look at it from like a very simple perspective, and a lot of times when I speak to people, and it's like, if you were an investor, would you purchase your business? And it's like most of the people are working 60, 80, 100 hours
Yeah.
to like make ends meet. Oh, well, I don't pay a lot in taxes. And it's like, if take yourself outside of your business, is it a smart purchase as from like an investor's perspective? If I told you, you know what, at the end of the day, when you figure your hourly rate, it's going to be $14 an hour, and you're going to have to work, 3,000 hours this year to be able to make that happen. It's like, absolutely not. But then you look at somebody, it's like, yeah, I can work 40 hours a week and I take X amount of time off a year. I'm running one job. And it's like, yeah, that like, it might not be the most lucrative career, but I could plug and play and buy that business and put somebody into that. It's just, we cheat the hours and we
Hmm.
skew the hours to make it look like we have these businesses that are actually successful. But if you look at it from an outsider's perspective, it's like that's the dumbest business model ever. Nobody in their right mind would be like, yeah, that's what I want. I want to work 80 hours a week to make, you know, 80 grand a year. It makes
Totally.
no sense.
I mean,
And
I love that framing of it, man. Have you valued your business like that?
not from a financial perspective,
Yeah.
but I just like, when I started transitioning the way that I wanted to operate, I didn't want to have to work 60, 70 hours a week
Yeah.
to get by.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
honestly, I looked at it from, I want to show up to work and I want to get paid for whatever hours I put on the job. So if I want to make more, I want to make less. And you can say, "Oh, that's an exchange for time, for money." But like, for most guys and girls in our industry, that's the way that they're operating, except they're exchanging all of their time and maybe they make money.
Yeah.
Like maybe.
Right.
They might not, depending on how they bid that project.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it's much different if you have calculated an hourly rate that has profit built into it. Like if you're doing a
Correct.
profit first model or I don't know how you have yours penciled out, but yeah, I mean, I love that framing of it, man. It's
I
totally
mean,
how I approach it. I want to be able to leave at 2 o'clock every afternoon and go for a 2 hour hike. Like
yeah.
it's what I want to do. And if I want to go for a 4 week vacation, I'm going to do that. And I'm
Yeah.
also
Well,
going
yeah,
to
and
get
like,
paid.
I think that you need to look at it from the perspective of like, "Hey, I'm gonna take time off. I'm not gonna work more than 40 hours a week." If I'm only productive for 32 hours a week, but I'm spending 8 hours on the logistical side of things, like, you need to be figuring your rate for that 32 hours rather than that 40 hours. And like, all right, so now I have a rate that seems as though customers can't afford it. So then it's looking at the business where, what's my market? Who's my customer that's willing to bear the cost of this rate? And what can I do that people are going to hire me,
Mhm.
rather than just being like, my price is too high. Well, it's like, well, what can you offer that's going to be different than other people that they're willing to pay that premium? And I don't think that most people don't step back long enough to try and realize my business isn't working.
Yeah.
Like, from a sheer numbers perspective, again, if you were to sell your business to somebody, nobody's going to buy it because it just financially doesn't make sense. But you're personally and emotionally attached to it, so you're going to do anything for your baby to survive. And it's like, as soon as you pull all the equipment off, your baby's not going to survive. So figure out how to make it survive without all of that. But I don't think that a lot of people do that.
It's true. Yeah. We're not taught. I mean, no architect is taught how to just, find clients even, how to market their
Yeah.
business. There's so many things about business that we're not taught. And yet most of us practice in, small businesses ultimately. And
Y-
yeah, I think it's interesting.
I wanted to touch quickly on, wait, Nick, are you talking? Go
Yeah,
ahead, we've been.
no, that's okay. I have a pretty direct question, and I don't necessarily need a super um, straightforward answer, but I'm curious. Like, I'm framing that wonderfully.
Oh
Um,
gosh.
well, I think a lot of people when they hear all this, like, "Oh, this is great," but how much money do you make? And I'm not asking you that directly. I mean, when you think about 20 years ago or 10 years ago, when you said, "Hey, everyone has a goal in mind as how much money they make." So I'm curious in reference to like how much income you were hoping that you would be making on an annual basis. Have you exceeded that? Have you met that? Or have you readjusted because your life is different?
Um, I think when I moved to rural Maine, I took a pay cut to
Sure.
work in the
Yeah.
firm that I was working in. So that salary didn't really meet my expectations. I think I was making $72,000 a year when I left that firm, and I was a licensed architect. I had a lot of experience, and
Yeah.
that's pretty. That's not a great. And this is a low cost of living area.
Mhm.
Um, the first year I left in June of 2013 to start the business that I have now. In that first year, I doubled my salary because I made 70 between when I left and the end of the year. So that
Mhm.
first year was like that already kind of exceeded my expectations
Sh
for this. And like that was a pretty big jump. And I was like, oh, okay. So being a business owner, like there, I can do a lot with this because,
Yeah.
my earnings are infinite now.
Mhm.
And, I would say over the years, so this is almost 11 years in business now. Um, it has exceeded my expectations to an incredible level. So I
Sure.
never expected to be able to make what I'm making as a sole operator right now. And
Mhm.
I would say each time that I was able to exponentially change things,
Mhm.
it was because of a very specific business decision that I made. You know, learning to create content on YouTube and then
Mhm.
putting systems around that to try and monetize an audience. Huge exponential change. Um, Creating more products that are focused at a broader and broader audience, huge
Mhm.
exponential change. Working on my email list, exponential change. So I think
Mhm.
I'm not prepared to talk exact numbers, but
No, no, I'm not asking that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I can highly recommend this to anybody. And I think if people were making even just a small percentage of this, I think it'd be a very healthy income. Yeah.
Yeah, and Eric, like just to add clarity around my question, I think that what happens in some of these conversations is it's not so much about the exact number. It's more that some people go through these changes and realize, well, my life is better because I can go on a 2 hour hike and take a 4 hour vacation. So I don't care if I only make $40,000 a year.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And when the audience is like, "That's fine, but I can't afford I have, 4 kids and live in the city, and I can't live on 40,000, so this is completely unrelatable." So I think that that's where my question really stems from is that, is this a truly financial, or financially lucrative, endeavor? And as expected, it is, and you've kind of outlined the fact that it's a little bit it's by doing everything. It
Yeah. And
isn't it
I
isn't
think
one thing.
it's hard because it, looking at someone who has a big audience, like a million subs on YouTube, it's like, well, yeah, that works because he has a million subs on YouTube. But the fact is, like, you don't need this to work. You don't need a million subs to make this
Yeah.
kind of a thing to work. And I'll say, I mean, you can just go look at my channel now. Like the latest video that I published, it has probably less than 20,000 views. Like the fact is with organic reach being what it is today, like I can publish a video and not get 100,000 views in a month. And that's terrible. That's just
Mhm,
like, it's terrible. And so I think, the option and the possibility for people, especially newer creators, newer people who are exploring this is like, maybe I can use this to market my business. It's never been better because they're looking for fresh ideas and new content creators and people who have a different, you know, way of approaching things. So it's completely accessible. And, you know, even given those limited number of views that I get on those videos, um, it's still massively successful
mhm,
because people, and I think, if I'm just framing this for design professionals, for example, um, and even builders, people who are looking to do the kind of work that projects that we would plug into, there's so much information out there, but people don't know what to do with that information. They're starved for insight, and so it's up to us to pull out what those insights are. Like, why would I hire Nick to build my home? Like, and that's what I think you do so well on your YouTube channel, is that you're able to give them those insights that they're looking for. And just that alone means that you're capturing all this traffic, and you can pick the projects that you want, and then ultimately choose what to do with that audience of people that sit around you. And that's a massive opportunity. And there's, if you think about the number of people in the world and the number of builders and architects and design professionals that are actually playing in the YouTube sandbox, it's a massive opportunity. It's a huge blue ocean. So I feel like the opportunity is so large that it's just the numbers will work out, even if you put just a little bit of effort into it. So I don't want to come across like, oh, it's great for him because he's got this massive audience and it only works in that context, because it can work at any scale.
And
Yeah.
that's exactly where my question comment was headed, where it's like most businesses don't need a million subscribers. And it was more specific to what you said before, where it's like, and I have the conversation with people, it doesn't matter if you have one person who follows you, a million people who follow you. For if you're getting in, like, you got into this initially to build your actual architecture
Hmm.
business,
Yeah.
and then you found interest in this that took you down a different path. It's fulfilling whatever internally that you are looking for, that you enjoy, and it's not necessarily to feed your architecture business anymore. So the million subscribers absolutely helps you with regard to how you're making income right now. But if you were doing what you were doing and you had 10 subscribers and you were using it to feed your architecture firm, it would 100% be worth it.
Yeah.
Because, like you said earlier, and what I tell people is, use whatever platform you want to live in as a way to document what you're doing and speak to who you are, and that's your whole story. That's your sale. At that point, people don't have to worry about if they want to hire you or if they don't. They understand who you are, what you do. That's your sale. Like, so at that point, once they're coming to you, it's pretty much a lock. And that's where I find it worth it. And again, really reiterating that you don't need a million followers. Like, even if you have 10, document what you're doing. And then when a client gets a hold of you, say, hey, before we go any further, I want you to check out my YouTube channel, my Instagram, and just see what we do and see if that's somebody who you want to hire or if that's a good fit. And for me, that's doing all the vetting, that's doing all the selling. I'm not having to send an email out or get on a phone call or go meet with the people to tell them who I am every single lead that comes through the door.
Exactly. And you can automate that. I mean, I have it automated on my site where they sign up for an investment guide, and then they get like this automated series of like, okay, this is what you're thinking of doing. This, and like they're answering a survey. So I get to know what their budget is and where they want to build, and then what their timeline is. And then they get this automated sequence, and then we can set up a discovery call. It's like there are all of these automations that you can set up to save yourself time. I mean, like for a small business owner and a solo shop, like you almost need that
Hmm.
because I don't have time to answer phone calls of people who are like, "Oh, I'm thinking about spending 150 grand to build a new home." And it's like, it's like not really my target audience, like just let them self-select on the front end. And I think there's all of these automations that, yeah, I'm sure you guys know about already, but it's things
Well,
I've learned about over time. And that now, as I'm building them for my business, I'm turning around and saying, hey, you want to do this? I'll teach you how to do it, and
I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of necessarily automating lead intake forms and things like that, because that's a whole nother topic. But I'd love to just hear high level, like what are you using and what does that process look like? Because that is a huge bottleneck for small businesses. And while we're larger than someone like Tyler, we're still a small business, and it still becomes a bottleneck. So I'm curious at like what does that look like from inception?
Yeah, it's a pop-up modal. So building on an island pops up. There, I basically have like a little thing which basically says, I'm speaking to my target avatar. So I know exactly the kind of person that I'm targeting. And like, since I'm doing a lot more island work and
Mm,
that's the work that's most interesting to me, that's the person that I'm targeting with this pop-up. And so it's a
mhm,
landing page. Basically, someone gets there, they enter their email address, and then they slip into ConvertKit, and ConvertKit sends them through an automated sequence. And at the end of that sequence, I've had enough time to vet their information that they've submitted to me. And if I think they're a good fit and they want to pursue it, we schedule, there's an automated Calendly, discovery
mhm.
call, 30-minute discovery call, talk about the project. If that they decide we want to go ahead, we think it's a good fit, then we start the onboarding process from there. So contract signing, scheduling, all that kind of stuff. That's the high level of what that looks like.
So you're using ConvertKit
Yep.
for that, yeah.
Yep.
And is that a series of emails or like a conditional questioning?
6 emails.
6 emails. And
Yep.
that's where they have to interact with?
Mhm.
Got it.
So I get feedback. So I know what the project is, I know the size, the
Yeah.
budget, those kind of things. But when they sign up for that list, they get the investment guides from me.
Mhm.
So the investment guide basically says, here's what you should expect. Here's my
Yeah.
fees. Here's this kind of projects that we do. Here's project delivery. Here's our partners
Mhm.
that we work with and those kind of things. So yeah, it's a beautifully like designed document. It's kind of,
Yeah.
it's on brand. It's meant to speak to the kind of person that I want to hire me basically. But I mean, anyone can do this. It doesn't have to be, mine's a pretty long document,
Mhm.
and I've developed it over the years, but it doesn't have to be that. It can be a 4-page document that basically does the work for you. It's like,
S
this is what we do. These are the kind of budgets we work with. These are
Mhm.
some case studies, testimonials.
So do you think, and it might be difficult to answer this, I find a lot of what I do very similar to what you do, probably just because of the scale
Right.
and the scarcity of our business. But with what you're doing essentially and vetting clients, a lot of times with your system, like you're creating a lot of no's, right? Where these people are like, there's either too much correspondence or this isn't a fit. And like for me, that's perfect because I'm not wasting my time. Do you think that this system would work for other people, or you're afforded the luxury of all of these no's and finding this very specific customer because you just don't need the volume of sales that other firms may need?
Well, I mean, it just depends on what your service is and what you're trying to select for, right? You can choose the filters that you put in the investment guide. I mean, if you want to work with people whose budgets are, you're doing interior design projects. I mean, interior designers use this system quite a lot.
Mhm.
Um, and it's a great way of just showing people like, okay, your furniture budget is like should be this. You wanted your furniture for your living room is going to be $75,000, and to most people, that's oh, look at that. Wow. I didn't realize I was going to spend that
Yeah.
much on furniture. Or, a typical piece of artwork is $12,000. And like, you want some custom pieces to look like this is what it's going to cost. But, if you're someone who's just doing styling overlays, for a bedroom or a kitchen or something like that, it's a different thing. But you can deliver all of that information up front in a way that doesn't spend your time to do it. Because what I can't stand now is just all the manual back and forth. And you guys must have this 10 times more than I do, but the phone calls or the email chains where it's like, well, is this included? Is that included? Just be upfront and clear about what you
Yeah.
do and who it's
Mhm.
for, and let them self-select. And you can do that, can be for any budget.
So at what point do you feel your business, you were confident enough to put that out there? Because I look at it for me and it took a really long time for me to realize like who I didn't want to work for rather than entertain every lead. And I think that when I first started out, it was like I don't want to dissuade any customer
Yeah.
from, potentially hiring me. So I wouldn't put these things into place. Um and I don't know if it was just like I realized I became more confident in my product and my process, or a combination of that, and I just don't need a ton of work to keep me busy. But at what point did you feel confident enough to put these systems into place where like, yeah, I want a very discerning customer. I have a very specific customer. Um, because I think a lot of guys and girls who are going to listen to this, they're of the mindset where it's like, I want to lead. I want to court every lead,
Mhm.
when in actuality, that's not the right move for a small business.
Yeah, I think it does take confidence to know that, and it takes some project experience because, in the beginning, I always say you're kinda like scratching lotto tickets. Like, you don't know which ones are gonna be the winners,
Yep.
and you gotta do a lot of scratching, and I definitely did a lot of scratching, and so I'm not pretending that this is like a day one solution necessarily, but I think plenty of us operate our businesses like it's day one when we're actually in year 4 or year
Mhm.
5, and we never, like to your point earlier, we never go back and revisit something that may not be working, and I
Mhm.
think what I do a lot of consultations and I have a lot of conversations with other design professionals, and people are just always telling me, like, all I do is spend time giving free advice, consultations. I'm doing site walks with people. I'm going to their house. I'm looking at these projects. It's like all this time wasting, like brain picking activities. And you do that because, for the same reason, Nick, why you were putting together the bid. It's like, I want that project. Like,
Yeah.
I think I want that project, and
Going into it knowing that like, we weren't even qualified for it in their eyes, you know?
yeah. And so like, why spend your time doing that when the person then, after 2 meetings of that, they come out and they say, well, really, we're looking to only spend, 50 grand. It's like, well, that's a bad fit for me. I just
Mhm.
wasted all that time. So I think, the process that I try and teach is that you do have to start thinking about who your ideal client avatar is, like, pretty early,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
if it's if you're doing a bunch of renovations and the budget's just not there and it's not making you happy, you got to change something. You,
I
you
think that
absolutely do.
I think that there's a couple things there. The client avatar, I think, is a very daunting task because we're not really sure how to define that, and we're worried that we're going to leave out a, a you know, a descriptor that could be additional lead flow, right? Where it's like, well, you get too hyper focused and then you're like it's like when you
Sure.
do SEO, it's like, well, what towns do you want to market in? I'm like, I'll build in any town if it's the right project and the right client. They're like, yeah, but what towns do you want to work in? And I'm like, I just, I just kind of answered it. They're like, well, we can't SEO, we can't optimize this unless we know what town. So it's like you're rattling off 10 towns and then you're like, wait, no, replace this one with that one because this one is actually a better town. So it's a daunting task because like you're trying to define this. But I think, you know to the example of me bidding this job and being in this position more than once, sometimes it's this competitive game, and maybe this is just me, but it's like I know that I'm not the right fit, or I know that we don't have a high chance, but I want the thrill of, like, trying to sell them
uh,
is enough, and if I can pull it off, this would be epic, and then you do it and you don't pull it off, and it's like, that was an epic fail.
yeah.
I just feel that I would rather spend my time on the person who already
Y
wants
y
us,
That's
you know?
fair, and
Like,
I don't disagree. It's when like I said, that golden carrot's dangled, it's like,
well,
I'm
the
let
the
me try.
the problem is that, like, that's what you're doing is what everyone is doing by not vetting customers and asking the right questions up front. You are hoping
You're
that
absolutely
you
right.
can change their mind, or that you can sell them on what you want to do, and explain to them how it's different and how it might be more money, but when actuality, like, they're just not a fit. Like, and that's the whole reason I think that a lot of it is confidence, right? You're confident in your product and your system, and confident enough to know when people aren't a good fit for you. And I think that early on, we want that funnel to be massive. And then we spend
Sure.
our time trying to convince customers that we're the right fit for them, rather than them already coming to us understanding that they're a fit.
There's also this idea of creating the anti-avatar, and, like, I think what you can take from that, Nick, was, like, what are the reasons they didn't hire you? And you're looking at that and saying, okay, we're a certain size. They didn't hire us because we're a certain size, or we lack a certain kind of portfolio. But, like, that can help be a focusing agent too. Like, okay, so
Mhm.
maybe you either want projects like that and you need a different portfolio, which means you need to make different decisions, or you capitalize on the fact that we're not like the big guys. And so you get personal attention and you get all these 6 other things because that's who we are. And so I feel like those, the anti-avatar can be very powerful. And we've all had anti-avatar clients, I'm sure, because I certainly had some early in my business where I was like, no way am I doing this kind of renovation ever again. It's just not happening. And I think when you don't know who exactly you're trying to target, the who you don't want to work with can be just as
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's true.
absolutely. I think that, and that's something similar to, I think, from a coaching perspective, like we were talking about earlier, where in this case, it's like who you don't want to work for, and the lessons of what not to do sometimes can be more valuable than the lessons of what to do. And I was thinking of it earlier when it comes to coaching, and it's like the imposter syndrome. And yeah, like what about people who are out there coaching who didn't have very many successful businesses? And it's like, well, damn, they know a lot. Like they know a lot of what not
Yeah.
to do. And even from like an athletic standpoint, right, where you have these people who are coming in and coaching, and like a lot of their value isn't in all of their successes and all of their triumphs, but the hard lessons that they learned when it didn't work out. And I think that that makes a really good coach, whether it's athletic or from a business perspective. Like I don't know if I want to hire somebody who was only ever
No,
successful,
yeah,
because
for sure.
they don't know how to deal with like that's an outlier.
By the same
That's
point,
not
you don't
standard.
want to hire the guy who doesn't have any wins either. And
No,
I see
absolutely
so much of
not.
that. I see there's a lot of people giving business advice in the architecture
Yeah.
space, and I'm sure that's true in the building space too. And I see these guys, I'm like, well, that doesn't work. What
No.
you're talking about actually does not work.
That's
So
that's the really frustrating part about social media is that too many people have a voice, and I think, I follow a lot of health and fitness accounts, and it's like the fear mongering around food. It's like if you listen to everyone, you literally can't eat anything. Can't eat fruit, can't eat red meat. You can't. It's just, and it's crazy. But you know, there is that there is that side of it, is like qualifying, where that information is coming from, and having that balance of like who's done it and has had success, but also, massive failure or just failures.
yeah, yeah, and I think that's kind of what we've been talking about here. It's like we're
Mm,
willing to share these failures, and I think that authenticity is the thing that makes us like have an audience and
yeah.
be successful. So yeah, I appreciate that you guys are willing to share all this stuff. I mean, I don't get to talk business with people very often, and it's amazing
Oh,
to do it.
good.
Actually, I really enjoy it.
Cool. Is there anything in the works for you that you have coming up that's exciting that you want to share?
I have a lot of irons in the fire, and I have another podcast
I
that
feel
I
like
do.
you have ADD.
I do. I might, man. Yeah, I have another podcast that I do on financial independence. So my wife just gave her notice at her job, so she's going to come to work for this business, and we're going to see where we can take this in the next couple of years and travel the world and
That's
kind of
awesome.
leave Maine for a little while because both our kids are off at school. We're going to be off at school very soon, and we're ready to go, man. We've been, I feel like I've had my feet planted in Maine for the past, 20 years. And it's just like, I'm ready to go. I've been grinding on this business, and now I want to try and make a business that I can do from anywhere. And that's been an aspirational goal for me personally for the past couple of years. And now that my kids are kind of leaving, it's come to fruition. And, so financial independence, retire early, is real, can be real.
That's what,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, you talk a lot about that. Is that the whole premise of the podcast, is financial independence?
Yeah, the podcast is with my high school buddy and best man in my wedding, and he reached financial independence in 2020, and
Mhm,
he's just kind of coaching me through it. So that's the premise of the podcast. So it's called Two Sides of Fi. He reached
mhm.
financial independence in 2020, and yeah, I'm due to reach it in June of this year. We'll see if the stock market kind of plays along, but that's the premise.
That's really cool.
That's really cool. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Me too.
E Eric,
Well, the podcast and the financial independence.
Are you on the path or what? You must be.
I mean, I'm just gonna say I'm on the path.
I
You
think
know,
I mean, in some way or the other, I
I'm
suppose we
going
all
in the
are.
right direction. Put it that way.
Yeah, that's
But
great.
I'm not stagnant and we're not moving backwards. So
That's awesome. I mean, you guys have put out so much great content, and I really appreciate it. And the quality is amazing, and the candor I love. So yeah, appreciate you guys.
cool. Yeah, we
Eric,
appreciate your time. I
uh,
know so this is cutting into your hiking time.
Oh, I took it earlier, man. Yeah.
All right. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask you one last question, but I'm gonna save it for a future episode we'll record together.
Oh, okay.
Um, because I do wanna talk about AI, and you did a video. For
Oh,
anyone
yeah.
that hasn't seen it, Eric posted this video on his YouTube channel about AI, and how, his thoughts on architecture. So let's get you back on the podcast. I'd love to unravel that
Yeah, for sure.
conversation a little bit more.
It'll be, light years ahead by the time we
Well, at the
regroup on
speed
that.
they're moving, yeah. I
It's crazy.
mean,
Yeah.
it's pretty wild.
Yeah, no doubt. Cool.
Eric, really appreciate you being on, man. It was super cool to chat with you, and congrats to everything that you're doing. It's really fun to follow along, and what you're, being an advocate for your industry is inspiring.
Cheers. Yeah, I feel the same about you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah,
Of course.
appreciate it.
All right, we'll see you.
See ya. Eric, just hit leave studio button,
Yep.
and then there's gonna be a pop-up. Just hit OK, let it upload, and then you can close the browser.
Okay. All right, we'll
You're the
see you
best,
guys.
man.
Thanks.
All
Take
We
right.
care.
appreciate it.
Cheers. Thank you.
Dude, his stuff, have you ever watched his videos?
Yes.
They're 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 so well done, and him talking about, like, you know, um, finding a love for filmmaking and photography. It's really, really cool.
I
Um
think like and I don't know if it was just coincidental, but I had like I said, I sat down and wrote a midweek podcast today about
mhm,
like trying to advocate for smaller businesses where it's like you can actually make a living and career um by being small
mhm,
and not resisting and fighting that as much as possible, and obviously that's something that he has done for himself and done well, so it was a really appropriate conversation. And I think it's really neat to see people out there who are promoting what they're doing and not necessarily saying you need to scale this business. A lot of the things that he's preaching are all done internally, and they're done with systems, processes, um, that he doesn't necessarily have to hire people and have the risk and liability that comes along with that.
mhm.
So that was super interesting and definitely appropriate given what I was sitting down and thinking about today.
It's funny. I really appreciated listening to you two chat, because I think that you guys are very similar, and you've been putting out some cool content on your Instagram that's a little bit more bite size, and higher level production. And obviously, you're a friend of mine, but I've personally actually really enjoyed that. I think it's showing a little bit of behind the curtain of TRG, which is fun.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it just comes from the same thing we're talking about. It's like putting things in place to be able to not have to kill myself on a day-to-day basis wearing my tool belt
Hmm.
and just exploring other opportunities for things that I just find interesting. Like I enjoy learning new things. I enjoy having some variation in my life. And sometimes it gets difficult to wake up, and whether it be a new job site, it's a lot of the same stuff each and every day. So it's been interesting and enjoyable to me. So I'm just finding different ways to make that happen and to be able to do that more regularly. But thank you.
Of course. Um, he brought up coaching, group coaching.
Yeah,
And interestingly, he probably doesn't know about Contractor Coalition Summit. But we got an event coming up May 15th through the 19th. Tyler, you're going to be there this time, which
I
is
am.
freaking cool. I don't know why I said freaking. It's fucking cool. Contractor Coalition Summit.com. We're doing a live podcast event, and then the education sessions and of course our Q&A. But I mean, it's going to be a killer event. Minneapolis, May 15th through the 19th. Head over to contractcoalitionsummit.com. We got some amazing attendees already signed up. Limited tickets are available, and I'm watching ticket after ticket come in my inbox each and every day. So make sure you sign up soon.
Yeah, I know it'll be after JLC this weekend, but Doug did inform us that one of our educational presentations sold out recently. So I know this is going to be released after the event, but I wanted to at least say that usually stuff that to me is something that is pretty cool.
We got
Normally stuff like that, I'm like, oh, whatever, yeah, but like the fact that the event sold enough tickets that it sold out before the show is something that's pretty neat. So I definitely appreciate that.
yeah. Thank you guys. We'll see you guys next week.
Adios.